Hi, and welcome to The Working Songwriter, the show where today's best songwriters come to talk shop. I'm your host, Joe Pug. Each episode here we host a distinguished guest, and we ask them to go deep on their inspiration, on their process, on the general ups and downs of making a life in music. So, whether you're a grizzled veteran, polishing your Onyx PRS custom shop guitar, or else a scrappy upstart, using compressed air to just clean your MacBook keyboard, this is your show. Because ultimately, it is what every writer seeks most, an ironclad excuse to put off actually writing. Hey everybody, it's the third Friday of June 2022, and I thank you for joining us. This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. I'm old enough to remember when you had to pay somebody called a web developer to get a website made, and it would always be some guy named Arnalds who drove a Dodge Stratus with only the back windows tinted and expired Kansas plates, and who's always trying to sell you gauged earrings, even though your ears weren't pierced. And old Arnalds would charge you about $1,000 for a website that would be obsolete in 6 months. But it's the future now, you guys. That's not how it works anymore. We're allowed to have nice things now. One of those nice things is Bandzoogle. Bandzoogle powers the websites of tens of thousands of musicians around the world, from weekend warriors to Grammy winners. All the features you need for a professional website are already built in. Hosting and a custom domain name, dozens of fully customizable design templates, tools to sell your music and merch commission-free. Listeners to the Working Songwriter podcast can go to bandzoogle.com to try it for free for 30 days. Use the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. If you'd like to hear some of my music live in the coming weeks, the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern, I'm over on my YouTube channel for Sunday Songs. That's a live stream. I'm live. I'm playing tunes live. I'm taking questions in the live chat. I'm taking requests in the live chat. It's a really fun, really interactive experience. I dare to say that we're building something of a community over there, including many people who are listeners of this podcast. So come on over and be a part of it. That's the first Sunday night of every month at 9 p.m. Eastern over on YouTube. Go to joepugmusic.com and click on the live stream tab to set a reminder. Finally, if you enjoy this podcast, if you'd like to help it remain a viable endeavor for me, here's a couple things that you could do to help. First, you could become a supporter of the show over at Patreon. Patreon is a platform that allows you to directly support creative endeavors that you find meaningful. You just head to their site, Patreon. You search for The Working Songwriter, or you search for my name, and then you sign up to kick in a few bucks every month for the show. Think of it as a voluntary subscription, a subscription that you certainly don't have to pay for, but that you choose to pay for because you dig the show and because you won't miss a few bucks at the end of the month. If just 1% of our listenership would kick in the price of a cup of coffee every month, it would make an immense difference. So thank you to everybody who's taken the time and the money to contribute in that way. And if you're not in a place to contribute in that way, there's still two ways that you could help us out for free. First, you could leave us a rating in the iTunes store, or second, you could simply tell a friend about the show. Spread the word about the show. The simple math on those two things is that they will help me much more than they will be a pain in the ass for you. Okay, I'll end all the harassment there. I hope you enjoy this week's episode. Our guest this week got his start in the bustling folk music scene of 1960s Boston before exploding onto the national stage with a hit song that has become a part of the American cultural fabric. Jonathan Edwards was recording his debut 1971 album when the session engineer lost one of the songs and asked him if he had anything else to record. He stepped into the booth and sang the newly written song Sunshine, which would go on to be a gold record for him, reaching number 4 on the Billboard charts. It would go on also to appear in numerous films and television shows, and have successful covers performed by Paul Westerberg, the Isley Brothers, and many others. He's recorded for Capricorn, Atlantic, MCA, Sugar Hill, and Reprise Records. He's collaborated with The Seldom Seen, Alison Krauss, and Vince Gill. He's toured with Don McLean, Steve Forbert, and many others. I had a chance to catch up with Jonathan on the phone earlier this month to hear about his journey so far. Jonathan Edwards, thanks so much for being a part of the Working Songwriter podcast. It sounds like music became a part of your life very early on. What did music look like in your household growing up in Virginia?
We always had a little upright spinet piano in the living room, and I took lessons one summer from the lady next door. But my mom was always in choirs. My adoptive mom was always in choirs and different singing things having to do with church. So I ended up learning a lot of gospel tunes, and my dad brought home. For some reason, he was a big fan of the Mills Brothers, and so I learned songs like Paper Doll and Down by the River, and just great stuff that the Mills Brothers did. So I had quite a varied input into my musical education growing up.
Are there any of those gospel songs that have stuck with you through the years that you find yourself returning to?
Sure. I mean, sometimes I'm called upon to sing at a funeral or something, and I'll break out Just a Closer Walk with Thee, or one of those songs, and that is stuck in my memory forever, because it just comes out. I just open my mouth and the words come out.
It's a beautiful thing, and it's a beautiful connection with your mom there too.
Yeah, for sure. I'm grateful.
So when did music look like something that it was going to be more than something that, you did at church, or, you were forced to do with the neighbor playing piano? Like, when did it become something that you were interested in on your own?
Well, as it turns out, rumor has it that I was a bit of a behavior problem growing up. You probably never hear that from people like me.
Never.
But as a result, I ended up in military school for the last 3 years of my high school career.
Oh, wow.
And the kid that lived in the room next door happened to have a guitar, and I had never seen one up close, believe it or not. And I asked if I could pick it up and play it, and he said, "Well, you can pick it up. I don't know if you can play it, but you can.
Yeah,
you can pick it up." I said, "Show me something to play," and he showed me the first few licks of "What I Say" by Ray Charles that was popular at the time, and I was hooked. I mean, I joke about it in my writing, my biographical writing and stuff. I said the clouds parted and the angels sang when I learned how to play that lick in about 20 minutes. And I kind of never looked back. That was the beginning of my realization that I could do this, maybe.
There is such an intoxicating feeling, and especially with the guitar, it's such a self-contained instrument, and your ability to do kind of a call and response with it can happen so quickly. It is uniquely captivating for people who are starting to play.
It is, and like you say, it's instantaneous gratification, and I'm a big fan of that typically.
Yeah, well, that makes two of us. It's also funny to me that you get shipped off to military school, and that's where you're introduced to the totem of 1960s counterculture, the acoustic guitar.
Yeah, it wasn't in my parents' plan. I assure you of that.
So you played for a bit in college in Ohio, but then very notably you end up getting your start playing music really in Boston. You hear so much about the 1960s scene of folk music in New York City. What made you travel further up 95 to start playing music rather than just stopping in New York when you got there?
Well, I had a band, of course, in college. I went to college in Athens, Ohio University, and I was always forming bands and always trying to do shows, try to get paid for playing music, and just trying to have some fun and learn the craft. and we were a pretty good band. And instead of going to my graduation ceremony or even the last semester of school, I decided that I would talk my band into moving to Boston, and that's what we did in '68.
What was the allure of Boston? Like, why that city rather than any other city you guys could have gone to?
Well, believe it or not, we thought that Boston would maybe be a little less intimidating than New York or LA or Nashville, which are always the big three when you're thinking about beginning a music career. And Boston was a young school. I mean, Boston was a young community, mostly of college kids and academics, and we thought our music would go over well in that environment, and for sure it did.
What did the scene look like on the ground when you arrived there? Like, were there clubs to play, or were you having to kind of, in a sort of DIY type of way, put concerts together?
Well, I've always been a DIY cat, and we pulled up into Boston after driving from Athens, Ohio. We pulled up just in time to see the music concerts that were going on in the Cambridge Common there in Harvard Square, and also in Boston Common across the river. And we pulled up just in time to see a band called Earth Opera, which featured Peter Rowan and Dave, the mandolin player. Mm-hmm. And we were blown away right from the start, and thought, wow, we've jumped out of our Ford Econoline just in time to get into this fire. And it was a lovely time of invention and creativity, and I loved and immersed myself in it completely from the start. What were some of
the artistic things that you were learning from those other bands that were already in town?
A freedom of expression, the right and privilege of being able to perform your thoughts and your spirit in front of a crowd. I mean, that's always been my guiding light, my North Star is that credo, and fortunately, I seem to assimilate that idea right from the start.
That's funny. And did you feel like it was a different environment that you were finding there in Boston than when you were gigging around college in Ohio?
Oh, sure. Oh, yeah. I mean, it was a fraternity sorority world in college. But here in Boston, it was a lot more detailed and a lot more pervasive and just, I don't know, so much fun.
Yeah. No, it sounds like it. There's nothing like finding a group of young, like-minded musicians, and you, I don't know, you can live off that for the rest of your lifetime, kind of remembering the energy that came with that crew.
Thank you, and I have. I've lived. I'm so fortunate and grateful to have found that aspect of our musical world, and so embraced it.
So were you guys and were those bands at the time, were people able to make a living in the city of Boston, just going gig to gig and playing? Like, what did that look like in just a practical sense at first?
Well, we still had this band, this rock and roll blues, and a few original songs band, and we ended up playing a lot of ski areas in the winters, and clubs around Boston, in the other months, and we learned our craft. You tend to gain a little education when you play 6 40-minute sets a night for 6 nights of the week.
Wow, 6 40-minute sets?
Yeah,
was the gig?
8 to 2, yeah. And don't forget to plug in the jukebox on your way off the stage.
Right, yeah. Yeah, I met an older musician once. He told me, your life will get a lot easier when you realize that you're not in the music business, you're in the alcohol sales business. And, and to hear you describing it like that, the club is saying, all right, kid, yeah, we'll pay you whatever it was, a couple $100 to come in and play. But the reason you're playing is so that they can sell beer to people for 6 hours,
Sure. But also an important component of my learning experience during those years was whenever the band didn't have work, I would go to the coffee houses and meet people there, and there were a lot of them, and they were vibrant and lively and supportive of what we were doing. And hey, can I play here tomorrow night? Mm-hmm. Sure, you can play here. Well, what's the pay? Oh no, you can play here tomorrow night.
Yeah. Well, and that's the direction that you ended up kind of turning. You moved away from the band and more into your solo career. What drew you towards that?
It was too loud. It was just literally too loud. I was standing in front of the drum riser, and the crash cymbal was right next to my left ear for several years, and
yeah.
It tended to hurt, and I'd get back to my room and I'd pick up my Martin guitar and go, oh yeah, this is what I want to hear. This is the music that calls to me.
And you were pretty dedicated, because even as you left that band, I mean, I'm assuming your folks who shipped you off to military school at 14 or 15, it probably was not their first idea or first choice that you'd be pursuing a career in music. And here, even after leaving the band, you continue on with it. What kept you so doggedly pursuing it at that time?
Well, it was part of the culture, way more than it is now. It was part of our day-to-day life. Mm-hmm. The performance of music and the writing of songs and the camaraderie, of course, of being in a band and being in the coffee house and meeting like-minded souls, like you say, and it was transformative.
How did you begin to start getting your music known outside of Boston and onto a more national stage? Did you begin to tour out of there?
Well, yes, I did, but it's become folk legend from me, because I've talked about this story. Someone provided me with a map and a list of all the colleges in New England, of which there are thousands, mm-hmm. and I packed up. I borrowed a sound system and I packed it in my 52 Pontiac, and I drove to the first place on the map and looked for an AC wall outlet that I could plug my sound system into, and set up a couple of mics and a couple of speakers, and I just started playing until the campus cops would come and decide that I wasn't really authorized to be there. Mm-hmm. By then I had attracted quite a little crowd, typically, and they went, oh no, let him play, he's great, that kind of thing. They were, again, in defiance of the campus cops. So I did that for an entire fall season, mm-hmm. and into the winter, and it caught the ear of an agent here and there, a booking agent, and pretty soon I was opening shows for other artists that came to those colleges.
Wow.
I know. It was like it's guerrilla marketing.
Yeah. Well, it also reminds you, I mean, so many people, you mentioned earlier, like, okay, well, if you wanted to have a music career at that time, and even now, you go to New York, LA, Nashville. And when you do that, you're waiting for someone to basically pluck you out of obscurity and put the whole business apparatus together for you. What you were doing in that tour of the Northeast, I mean, there was no mediating influence between you and an audience. You'd take out your guitar and you would look directly for an audience. That's such a different way of going about it than that way I just described.
Exactly. That's exactly what it felt like. Here I was. I got a little sound system. I got some volume, and people are starting to stop and listen. And some are sitting down in front, cross-legged in front of my microphone stands. And it was instant instant love and gratification again, that caused me to keep going, and I did, and I never looked back. Really, I've really done that since then.
Such an interesting and kind of unusual direction to have taken so early on. Where do you think it comes from in your personality or your character to have taken that direction rather than a more traditional one in the music business?
Well, I think like a lot of artists of any stripe, starting out, sometimes in our childhood or in our early formative years, we weren't noticed, we weren't listened to, we weren't acknowledged, and all of a sudden, you pick up a guitar or a paintbrush or a wood carving chisel, and you start to make something, and people start to listen and watch and absorb what you're trying to do and help you by their applause and by their encouragement to point you in directions that you should take to gain even more of their popularity. It's a fascinating experience.
Getting better at your instrument is an essential part of being a songwriter. When you play better guitar, you write better songs. It's that simple. How do you do that, though? Sure, you could get lessons from the neighbor who majored in dotted half notes at Rhode Island School of Design, but that'll cost you an arm and a leg. Or else you could pull up YouTube and pay nothing at all, but that becomes the ultimate time suck. You'll end up sifting through videos of nerds unironically weeping as they discuss the difference in tone between monster cables and whirlwind cables. What's the sweet spot in between? Peghead Nation, the online home for American roots music. They feature curated video workshops with world-class instructors on guitar, mandolin, banjo, fiddle, upright bass, dobro, and ukulele. They have levels of instruction that meet the needs of both scrappy upstarts and grizzled veterans, and most importantly of all, it comes in at a low monthly subscription that actual strapped-for-cash songwriters can easily afford. To start taking classes yourself, head on over to pegheadnation.com to check out their 50 available courses. Enter the promo code TWS, the initials of our show, to get your first month free. You can also send a gift subscription to the songwriter in your life or to the player in your band who needs a not-so-subtle hint about their playing prowess. Peghead Nation, when you play better guitar, you write better songs. It's that simple. Jonathan Edwards really carved a unique path for himself, from military school to the band life in Boston, to a solo career that landed him on the Billboard charts, to a decade-long detour in the Caribbean, and now into the role of American music elder statesman, still on the road touring and releasing vital music. To me, it sounds like the life well lived, constantly in contact with an audience, with other humanity, but definitively still on his own trip. And there's a wonderful poem by Michelle Y. Burke that gets at that feeling. It's entitled, A Life. Each afternoon, he took his pipe and led his goats beyond the pasture to a neighbor's field behind his farm. Not exactly his, but not exactly not. As the goats clipped the tall grasses, he sat in the chair he never failed to bring. Sometimes he read, most often not. The vetch climbed the goldenrod, the dandelions turned from gold to globe, and every day he went, thinking to himself how good it was to be almost, but not entirely, alone. I've read that your debut album, so you go on this kind of this self-directed tour, this kind of guerrilla tour of these colleges. You end up with an agent who starts to book you with some national touring acts coming through, and then presumably at that point you have this chance to record your debut album. I've read that was also recorded in an unusual way, and that there were many different sessions, different studios, different attempts to get that debut album done. Can you kind of speak to that initial album process, how it was done, and what you learned from it?
Wow, we learned spontaneity, I can tell you that, because we would only, the only studio time available to us, because we had no resources of any kind, was to go in at night when no one, at 2 a.m. when the studio was empty, and try to find an engineer who was willing to to watch us and listen to us and figure out what we were trying to do, because we didn't know. We just saw the red light on, and we had a couple of songs in our saddlebag, and we just went for it. And it was obviously a learning experience, and there were a lot of mistakes, and there were a lot of trials in our in our world. But we like you said, we traveled from studio to studio, whatever time we could get, and we were learning the craft as we went. We were learning how to translate these songs in our saddlebag and in our hands and in our voices and in our vision into something that someone might want to hear.
It's interesting because now, home recording technology has become so ubiquitous that I'll bet most bands or most musicians kind of begin with that before they'd ever play a gig. This is totally the opposite. You've spent, years playing a gig, you've kind of honed this talent, and now you have to get it through to a new medium. Can you remember what were some of the specific early mistakes that you made, and what were some of the specific techniques you had to learn to take what was the live show and get it across to tape?
Wow. Well, there was a kind of famous mistake that was made by our engineer, who was, I imagine, was in a voluntary position. But he knew his way around the studio, and it was a great studio, at least the one that we ended up with. And one night after hours of recording all day, because we finally got some daytime hours, he inadvertently erased a song from the 2-inch tape, and he panicked. And we looked through. I remember looking through boxes and boxes of 2-inch tape, looking for this song that was ironically called "Please Find Me." And he said, in a emotional panic, he looked at me and said, "Man, do you have something we can put on this tape before they come in tomorrow to start recording again, before everyone comes in tomorrow? Do you have something you can put on this gaping hole in the tape?" I said, "Well, yeah, I just wrote this one. Let me go out there and see how it sounds." I walked out, picked up my guitar, and recorded "Sunshine" in one or two takes.
Wow.
Yeah.
And a couple takes that would certainly change your life. When could you tell that there's going to be something different with that song "Sunshine" and that it was essentially going to be a hit? Like, was there a moment when you saw it taking off and you said, "Okay, this is a thing cut from an entirely different cloth"? When literally when I went out there into the soundstage and started this groove, I didn't know what I was going to do. I had the song and committed to memory and everything, but I just didn't know how it was going to go. And the groove that I started with is the groove that permeates through the song, and I don't want to sound too egotistical, but it's a pretty magical groove, and one I've struggled at times to emulate over the years, but it just had a feel. And it's hard to describe, but yes, it did sound very special. And the next
and after I'd finished recording it, the engineer said, "Wow, that's pretty good." I said, "Yeah, and look, there's Stuart left his bass over there in the corner. I think you mind if I try to put that on?" So I went out and picked up the bass and put the bass on, and that's a distinctive,
Yes.
unique sounding part. And then the next day, I talked to my dear drummer friend Rich Edelman into trying to follow a song that that had its tempo challenges, subtle tempo challenges, as it would with a guy with a guitar.
Right.
And he overdubbed drums to that song, and that's the three of us on the two of us on that record.
That's it. That's the whole record right there.
Yeah.
What a trip.
I know. And then it became a hit on the radio fairly accidentally from my point of view. The Capricorn Records didn't really have an idea what to do with a cowboy in a cowboy hat and cowboy boots from Massachusetts. But they persevered, and I some radio somewhere picked it up off the album, and it lit up the phones, and boom,
Yeah.
I knew from that moment on that this song and this album were going to have legs.
Was there a show in particular that you were playing where just the audience was different, and you said, "Oh, like this isn't exactly finding an AC outlet and plugging in my my PA and trying to get people here. Like, there's people who've heard this song, they're coming out to see us." Like, was there a show, a particular tour that you remember things changing?
Well, about that time that people were buying the record. It was actually for sale long after it was a hit on the radio. They finally, supplied it to stores, and it actually, people were familiar with the songs now, and that was a brand new wrinkle in my in my stage appearances. Wow, they know this song. When I started out, they start out a song like Emma. It has this fairly distinctive intro, and they started to applaud. And oh my God, this is really awesome. And it went from there, man. It was like, wow, hard to describe the feeling and the gratitude that I felt, and the gratification just from, wow, somebody is listening.
Yes. Well, and the gratitude of not being shooed away by the campus cops, too, at that point. I got to imagine was pretty good.
Yeah.
How did the success of that change your life on a personal level? Were you able to handle it with aplomb, or was it a difficult transition?
It was a difficult transition. I felt that I perceived changes from my friends and cohorts more than me. I felt a certain conviction to not change, because I'd read all these stories about what fame and fortune does to people, and I didn't have any fortune, but I had some fame. and I went about my life to try and not change, and because I loved the life I was in, I loved the people I was living with. I loved the musical community that were my life for the last several years before suddenly I was plucked from this nest of musicians and songwriters.
What were some of the changes you noticed in your counterparts and fellow musicians at that time that were difficult to navigate?
Oh, well, just kidding me about, oh, here he comes, make way for the big star, big rock and roll star, right. Here he comes, And it bothered me. I mean, I didn't let it show, I hope, but it did bother me on several levels.
Yeah, I can see that, especially when you've been so mindful to not embody that stereotype. That pissed me off too.
Exactly.
So what's really interesting about Sunshine is it was not just a hit at that time. It's remained a pretty vital part of American culture, of the American cultural fabric for just decades at this point. How do you, as both a person and an artist, relate to a piece of work that has become a phenomenon like that? I mean, it really is a phenomenon. You have to be aware of it. What is your relationship with that song?
Well, I tell people that, everybody from my generation knows that song, knows the beginning, knows the chorus. Mm-hmm. Everybody knows that song. Not many people know me. So that's one dichotomy that comes to mind. It couldn't have been more timely. That song about, Nixon was president. I had just endured a pretty traumatic draft board pre-induction physical in Columbus, Ohio, and I was angry and frustrated about the direction our country was going in Vietnam, etc. And he can't even run his own life. I'll be damned if he'll run mine, and mm-hmm. I'm going to run my own life now, and I did. I mean, for better or worse, I did. I kept the whole paradigm of fame and notoriety at as much arm's length as I could, and meanwhile working 250 shows a
right.
year for 3 years.
Yeah, that's serious.
But it was a pleasure. It was an absolute pleasure, and it was never like work. I remember myself saying to people, "Man, don't stop me. Get out of my way. I'm really happy doing this. I don't want to rest. There's no need to rest. I'm relaxed out there, and I'm being acknowledged and listened to, and this is heaven."
There you go. I'll sleep when I'm obscure.
Exactly. So I'm getting a lot of sleep these days.
Oh man, well, aren't we all? It's really interesting to me that artistically after that, you didn't seem to chase the dragon's tail by trying to replicate Sunshine, especially in the 70s. You'd go on to make country and bluegrass records, like with The Seldom Seen. And particularly back then, bluegrass music was very much an American subculture. How did you avoid falling into the artistic trap of trying to chase the dragon's tail of your hit? I mean, it seems that you just followed the drummer boy of your muse where it went.
I did. And that's exactly what it felt like. Exactly what it felt like. Thanks for noticing.
Yeah.
It felt like that. I was just following the pencil of my notebook. Mm. And taking the songs where they led. It's a cliche, but that's exactly how it felt and exactly what was my avocation.
Did you have any pressure from labels or anyone in the business apparatus that wanted you to do different, or was it pretty well supported?
I didn't pay a whole lot of attention to the suits, and there weren't many. But I was on my own. I was on my own recognizance.
You have you've remained in the arts for years. It's hard enough to find initial success in music and the arts. It's virtually impossible to do it in a sustained manner over the course of many years. How have you managed to do that? How have you, on a very practical level, built a business that has been a career for 50 years?
Well, I've taken some chances. I've also taken some time off. I lived in the Caribbean for 10 years. I call it my lost decade, mm-hmm. during which I absorbed all the wonderful Caribbean music that came to our island. I've taken some time off, and I've strayed from the path of productivity. But mostly, I am compelled to write. I'm compelled to create from my time in art school. it has served me very well, and I find it a valuable component of my personality that I rely on. I mean, it's how I wake up in the morning. It's how I don't sleep at night.
Yeah. Yeah. Did you need that time, those 10 years, like almost away from it to recharge?
Yeah. I mean, I was doing sporadic shows the whole time, flying back to the States all the time and doing small tours. But, it was refreshing, very, very much so, and enlightening on a number of levels. And, life is what happens, when you're making plans, I think someone said.
Yeah.
But it's also what enriches the artistic experience, and the fuel. Life is what fuels the creativity to carry on.
Well, it certainly comes through in your songs and in your records. And so thank you for writing those, and thank you for being a part of the Working Songwriter. I really appreciate it.
Oh, well, thank you. I've enjoyed this very much.
This week's show is brought to you by Bandzoogle. Built by musicians and for musicians, Bandzoogle is an all-in-one platform to build a beautiful website for your music. Use promo code TWS, the initials of our podcast, TWS, to get 15% off the first year of any subscription. Jonathan Edwards' latest album is entitled Right Where I Am, available everywhere music is sold or streamed. If before we meet again you sit down to write, please remember, an expensive drug habit is not a song, a compelling Instagram account is not a song, and most importantly, reverb is not a song. So let all that take care of itself, and for you, just keep your eye on the song.